Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock. Let's go over the market. Let's talk about what is happening in this market on a bit of a bounce day, question mark in the market. I mean, the market itself is red, but most of Max 7 is experiencing at least some level of a bounce, or at least most of them are. Including Tesla. So yeah, let's go over today. Let's go over what we can expect moving into the rest of the week. We of course have CPI tomorrow, and I believe PPI is on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. So that, could pretty much determine whether or not, there's essentially more pain ahead, or we're finally ready to potentially lift off at the very least short term and get a bit of a dead cat bounce in the market, which, the whole market right now is pretty oversold, right? It is what it is. But yeah, I'll go over all that. I'll go over the VIX briefly. And yeah, so if you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, I do share my thoughts with my members every single day in my YouTube membership for just $3 a month. You get access to mainly Tesla stocks, sometimes other stocks as well. Or for $5 a month, you get access to everything in the first tier plus NVIDIA updates as well as the market is trading. But jumping into a Tesla, closing the day up almost 4% on the day, which is not, obviously, not relative to the drop. It's not amazing, but at this point, sometimes, you get what you take what you can get. So still a nice 4% back up to the upside, closing within yesterday's candle, but we did break down below it. You can argue it's an inside day candle. I prefer inside day candles when they're like truly inside the full range, which we obviously broke down below yesterday's range briefly in the morning. But nonetheless, there's a few things to watch, right? So first of all, you have these two lines right here. What are these two lines? This is the pre-market high and the pre-market low. Tesla pretty much danced right in between these lines for the most part throughout the entire day, not really showing any clear direction one way or the other. We tried to get a nice little breakout on this candle, but ultimately failed, and there's still more work to be done, obviously. But what do we need to do for Tesla stock to get out of, this detriment, right? I'm obviously looking at this. You can definitely make an argument this is a small little bear flag we're setting up that looks something like this, or that's from a bearish lens, or from a more bullish lens, you can argue the fact that this is actually just, let's go 15 minutes, a bit easier to show it actually. So yeah, so you can either argue this is essentially a bear flag, something like this, let's say. I don't know, like this, I guess, or whatever, right? Bit of a bear flag or wedge. Or if you're more on the bullish perspective, you can argue this is actually a bullish rising triangle pattern, which is looking like something like this, right? This is that bullish rising triangle pattern. It's small, but this could be something that brings us well back into the 250s, which is a pretty important level we'll talk about soon. And this is essentially that same pattern that we formed very large on the daily chart back over here before we went to fresh all-time highs. I'm sure you remember this one, where we pretty much did the same thing, where we kept making these higher lows like this, and then we had that equal resistance highs up here. That's obviously that rising triangle pattern, pretty much the same pattern, just now obviously where we are at currently, right? Same idea, right? You can see here, pretty much same idea. So let's see. Let's see how this plays out, right? It pretty much hinges on CPI tomorrow, right? At the end of the day, because we're pretty much near the apex of it. So it pretty much comes down to CPI. Obviously, over last night we got some interesting news about Donald Trump talking about Tesla, how he's essentially protecting Tesla. There've been very aggressive protests against Tesla, not just peaceful protests, but pretty aggressive ones as well. And Trump has essentially said that not only is he pretty much labeling that as terrorism now, apparently. He also went and said that he's going to buy a Tesla to support Elon and Tesla, which is interesting. And now a lot of people are saying they're buying Teslas. I don't know, man. We're in a quite a world here. I'm not going to lie, but that potentially contributed a bit to the this little relief, because Tesla did outperform the market today, obviously. So what does Tesla overall need to do though, right? Yeah, we have this 15-minute, potential, rising triangle pattern. Yeah, we have that. Yeah, we have this 15-minute, very, very large, very aggressive descending channel that we are in, which you can see right here. We've been pretty much zigzagging in it for quite some time, pretty much since the 302s, which is pretty insane. Once we break out of this channel, assuming we break out to the north side, which would essentially be a breakout of, I would say, about closer to 240s, like low to mid 240s, something along the lines of that. That will be pretty important to to break, and not only break but hold, right? We want to kind of get out of here, come back down, hold, and then make our way higher. That's kind of like the rough game plan, you can say. But obviously there's still more work to be done, and again, with CPI and PPI one after each other, day after day, essentially, it's a question mark. It's absolutely a question mark. But again, as long as we're within this descending channel, technically speaking, the bears still have the control. So that's number one, right? The bears or the bulls want to break out of this channel, get a nice retest, or just essentially get the hell out of here, right? Get out of this prison, if you will, that the bulls are definitely in right now, which is this descending channel for quite some time now. So that's step number one. What is step number two? Step number two is going to be two things on the 1 hour time frame, right? This is the 1 hour time frame. So you can see we actually had that descending wedge. Remember that descending wedge we broke down out of right here? We actually came back and we actually retested at and rejected at it this morning pretty almost perfectly, you can argue, until we finally pushed up, and now we're kind of back in it, which is nice to see. So that does show that the bulls are getting a little bit more control here. Not a crazy amount. There's still more work to be done for sure, but at least something, right? That's not too bad. You know, this is that what looks like a bear flag potentially, right? So definitely something to watch out for. But the bulls, what they want to do in the 1 hour is two things, and one of which is, you know, a lot to do, right? So obviously we have that 50-minute downward channel, which is really like this, I would argue, the easier step, honestly. The harder step would be to break a high. In this case, I would say, honestly, this high right here of about 263 roughly, right? Because you can see pretty much this whole time, right? We've been pretty consistently going lower lows, lower highs, right? Constantly going lower lows, lower highs, right? And you can argue the fact that, you know, the recent high, at least on the 1 hour chart, is somewhere sitting around this kind of mid 260-ish region right here, right? Because we set that low, we set the smaller high, then we went lower, right? So we want to break that chain. We want to start creating higher highs, or at the very least higher lows. So even if we get a rally back up like this and get resisted and we come back down like this, we want to start setting a higher low, and then that will give a potential like bungee type price action or support to the price in order to finally break past and create a fresh higher high. Like, we need to break the chain of lower lows, lower highs ultimately, right? Sometimes it's that simple, and unfortunately we cannot do that. What else will come with that, which kind of goes hand in hand, is if we can finally start breaking the chain of lower lows, lower highs, and, you know, start creating at the very least higher lows, ideally higher lows, higher highs. What that's going to do is take this emo, which if I can actually color code it a bit, it makes it a little more cleaner if I go something like this, right? Which is the 921 EMA, or 821 EMA, which is this, well, in this case it's red because it's bearish, of course. And then we have the 50 EMA, which is this white line on the 1 hour. And you can see, you know, we had a little bit of a recovery here. We kind of stalled out for quite some time. This was back in 360. I feel like the fact that we can see on the 1 hour time frame prices of a 230 and 360 all on the same screen just shows how drastic this has been and how very aggressive the selling pressure has been. Like, quite literally unprecedented selling pressure. Like, never before we have seen Tesla sell this aggressively, which is crazy. I cannot believe this is 360. That's wild stuff. But nonetheless, the point is the fact that, you know, once we lost this important level of 350 roughly over here and we started really crashing, you know, not once has this cloud and the EMAs essentially flipped back to bullish. So what's step number one? Step number one, for the EMAs at least, is, well, we want to get back above the EMAs, turn them back into support, and then the most important thing is to maintain that, right? Because usually you can see we kind of were close to doing it here, but we couldn't hold long enough, right? The selling pressure came in too aggressively, too quickly, and they just, you know, the bulls couldn't hold it, right? The sellers just, you know, the selling pressure came in too fast, too aggressive. So we want to do something like this, but more importantly, we want to continue holding and continue showing strength above the cloud so that it actually flips back to being bullish and the cloud turns back to green, essentially. That's step number one. That's not usually enough, but that's a good start, something that we clearly haven't been able to do this whole downturn, or at least the vast majority of it. Number two, once that actually does happen and this goes back to green, which at some point it will, we're not going to continue going down forever until we hit zero and go into the negatives, obviously. At some point it will. Step number two is, once that turns green, is to also get it above the 50 EMA. We want to get both of these EMAs, the 8 and 21, above the 50. And once that can happen, that really starts to show that the bullish momentum is stepping in and the bearish momentum is fading, because that will also act as a sort of floor, if you will, to the stock and to potentially the selling pressure as a support to finally then break this high and start creating potentially what could be a chain of higher highs and now higher lows, as opposed to right now what we've been pretty much doing is higher highs or lower lows, lower highs, right? So those are the kind of rough steps, if you will, that we need to do in order to break these things, if you will. Similar idea on the daily. The daily is pretty much the exact same thing, right? Also has been pretty much printing lower lows, lower highs constantly, right? Very aggressive over here, of course, extremely aggressive. The fact that we went from like 300 all the way down to pretty much 220s within like just over a week of price action is very, very intense. But that's what the bulls really need to do. Same idea on the 1 hour chart, just on the daily. It's going to take longer, of course. 1 hour kind of gives you an early look to it and an early glimpse of what's to potentially come. But obviously the daily will take longer, but it'll be more impactful when, not if, when, because it will happen at some point. Maybe, you know, obviously we can still go lower, but it will happen at some point. But when the daily can turn this back into, the cloud essentially back into support and back into a green cloud, kind of like what I did over here. You can see, you know, this was red over here. came out of it, came back into it as support. This is pretty much it, actually. This is obviously a more simple version. This is much more intense selling, but this is kind of, more or less what you want to be seeing. Whether it's a gap up or just price action makes its way over, whatever the case may be, the point is the fact that price goes over. You can see the cloud goes from red to green. Both of them are back above the 50 EMA, and then we come back into it, turn it into support, and we rocket back up, right? This is roughly what I want to see moving forward, right? And until this happens, the bears have overall control still. Even if Tesla rockets back up to, let's say, 250s tomorrow, the bears still have control on the longer time frame, on the daily. Like, yeah, that'll start signaling some good signs on the 1 hour chart, and that could be a good sign of things to come. But if you really truly want to change the trend, not just for maybe a week, but for like weeks, maybe even months, the daily is where we really need to start flipping that momentum back to bullish, right? And that's essentially the way you want to do it. You want to see both of these bad boys not only turn green, but also back above the 50 EMA on the daily. And that to me will show a strong reversal, because you can see what happened when we did the opposite over here, kind of sideways consolidation, broke below the EMA's crossed below the 50, you can see here, and look what happened, right? Very aggressive. I mean, abnormally aggressive, but aggressive nonetheless. Selling pressure and momentum has been essentially lost from the bullish perspective. So that's pretty much what the bulls want to do. And the final thing we'll talk about, of course, is going to be the weekly. So the weekly can potentially, this is like me really putting on a bullish cap. Now, again, let's make this things very, very clear. The bears are still in control. No questions about that. But at the same time, Tesla is unprecedentedly oversold, like literally historically oversold. It's arguably never been this oversold. It's not arguably, actually, literally has never been this aggressively oversold this quickly in the history of the stock. So obviously we know Tesla can move up and down very quickly, whether it's up like we just saw not that long ago, or clearly back down like we're just witnessing right now. The opposite, again, this time to the upside can be true. I remember saying the same thing up here. Tesla can go down as fast as it goes up. I don't think it'll be this fast, but nonetheless, right? Point stands. Same idea here now. I'll be saying the same thing here. Tesla can also go back up as fast as it came back down. But what do the bulls want to see? Well, like I said, we did enter the next major level of price support, right? A lot of potential demand around here as we come into this rough fair value gap over here. And we're so far finding that price support. If this fails, of course, and we lose pretty much high 2-teens to about 220, the next level, like I said, is pretty much right around here, closer to the 190, we'll say. Worst case scenario, if we get there, I'd be like, if we drop below this, will be the stock is done. 160. That's like worst case scenario. If we lose that, then I don't even want to think about it. I'll be honest. But one thing that can happen, and again, this is me putting on my bullish cap, and this is considering that it is very oversold, and it's when stocks, especially like Tesla, get this oversold or overbought, it's almost like you're taking a beach ball in the water and you're pushing it down, down, down. And the further you're pushing it down, the faster and more aggressively it's going to pop back up out of the water, right? It's the same idea here. It's like a spring-loaded type price action, where this feels kind of like that, where at some point or another, I don't know when, this should pop very aggressively back to the upside. We'll determine where, of course. We can use simple Fibonacci's, which I'll do very soon. But the point I'm trying to make on the weekly is this. If Tesla somehow, maybe based on CPI, PPI, or whatever, can close essentially above, we'll say low to mid 250s. If we can get above there, which is going to be a crucial level, because that's going to be us coming back into this channel resistance, right? We're also where the 8 EMA sits. Like, this level will be really crucial. But if Tesla can close at or above, again, about, we'll say mid 250s, roughly, we'll say, give or take, of course, low to mid 250s, this can potentially print a very, very bullish hammer candle on the weekly. Now, there's work to be done. We're not assuming things like that's going to happen. But if something pretty crazy to the opposite end of the spectrum were to happen, that's something essentially. So again, massive rally. Tesla would essentially print ideally a white, or in this case, or green or white hammer candle on the weekly, and that should almost not guarantee, but damn good chance that spring loads back up to at least mean reversion levels over here, which honestly could even take us to 307, best case scenario 320s. But that's still, it's a big if. I'm not saying that's going to happen. We'll obviously react accordingly. If it does happen, then of course, that's a different story, but that's something to potentially watch out for, because, again, with data points coming out this week, there is something to watch out for. Another way to look at it is the Fibonacci's, assuming this kind of, we'll say, 217 or whatever level down here was the bottom, roughly 215, 217, whatever. Assuming this was the bottom, right? Which it could be, it absolutely could be. This is a bottom candidate. Again, if this is not, then we come down to about 180s, 190s. But this is a bottom candidate, and just for theoretical purposes, assuming it is the bottom, at least for now, the Fibonacci's can tell us where we can go next. In my opinion, the first level I'll be looking for is going to be the 382 level, which will actually bring Tesla pretty much right back into that 320s level, which is going to be retesting this massive breakdown that we had right over here, which would be something to watch for potentially moving into, maybe the end of the month or something like that, depending on how fast it happens, right? So let's watch for that. Let's see how that plays out. And the final thing we'll talk about quickly is the VIX. The VIX finally showing a little bit of weakness here, right? Finally closing red, about just over 3%. And this is happening while the market, did I move these things back up or something? What the hell happened here? And this is happening while the market is closing red. SPY is down almost 1%. QQQ is down 1/4%. So the markets are technically closing red, and VIX is red. That's usually a good sign, at least in this case for the bulls, because they're both red, right? That means, usually it's the opposite, right? Usually if markets are red, the VIX is green, and vice versa, right? In this case, they're both red, which is a bit of a abnormality, if you will, which could be a good sign. But what we still need to see on the VIX is, of course, falling out of this massive rising 1 hour rather channel, and the daily itself. Well, it's still very far away from the 8 EMA. It needs to get back essentially under the clouds and pretty much do the opposite of what I said Tesla needs to do. And as if that wasn't enough, the market is in a bit of a finicky spot, no doubt. But there is still hope, like the weekly on the QQQ, for instance, still holding at a potential crucial level with this, parallel channel that we're in right now, which is good. Still below the 50 EMA, that needs to get recaptured. But the QQQ, like the market, guys, the market is 3.5% almost below the 8 EMA. You don't see that very often when the market sells off this aggressive, that it's this far and there's this much of a gap below it and the 8 EMA. You don't see that very often. So let's see how this plays out. Let's see how it plays out, right? No guarantees. CPI tomorrow, PPI day after. Let's see. But all in all, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow. Peace.